And welcome to another episode of Head First with Dr. Hill. Thanks for listening and watching. Today's guest is JP Sears. JP is a life coach and internet comedian you may have seen across the internet. He's all over YouTube and other health and wellness podcasts. He's known for his satirical parodying of veganism, gluten-free fads, other new age health beliefs, and basically lampooning all things spiritual, which is wonderful. Although we'll dig into a little bit and see where the line is for him, I think, a little bit later on. So JP, welcome to the show. You're actually our first Skype guest, so we have to sort of do the making eye contact through the internet thing, which is a little tricky, but that's fine.
Yeah, well, Dr. Hill, thank you for having me on, and it's a pleasure to be here pretending like I'm holding eye contact with you.
That's great. That's great. So, JP, I've seen you on podcasts and YouTube and all kinds of things, and of course what struck me, and I'm sure many folks who are familiar with you, is you have this incredible ability to lampoon, satirize these things that we hold dear, like being gluten-free or paleo or vegan or doing yoga or filling our Instagram accounts up with pictures of us in, Shavasana or something. I guess Shavasana would be that exciting. But this is not just a spoof for you. Is that right? This is, you actually do have some health and wellness perspective. You are a life coach,
Sure.
not simply a comedian. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that would be very true. It's very important for me to come from a place of respect with regard to call it the subject matter that I do comedy on. Mm-hmm. And because I don't think the world needs any more just condescending judgment and negative attitudes. So, I think we have too much of that as it is, which is probably me having a negative attitude about negative attitudes. I'll work on that. So, I've been in the health world for a long time. I've been gluten-free for 15 years. I'm incredibly mindful of my eating practices, incredibly mindful of my quote-unquote spiritual practices and self-growth. I do yoga. I have an Instagram account, and there's a part of me that gets my self-esteem built from my Instagram account and other things. So, I would dare say whether it's in a very direct way or a slightly less than very direct way, everything I do comedy on, it's something that's near and dear to me in my life.
So what kind of personal coaching do you do? I mean, I see wellness or emotional healing. Is that a phrase that you've...
Yeah, so the past 15 years, it's been primarily what I would call emotional healing coaching. Mm-hmm. And it's just this past January, I finally kind of surrendered my practice, gave it up just because there's been so many new opportunities that have been growing in the garden of life that feel very purposeful to devote my time and attention on to fertilize. But the being able to work with people in the realm of their heart and their emotions in very vulnerable ways for the past 15 years has been very, very fruitful for me. It's taught me so much. It's helped me heal so much about my life while hopefully giving benefit to other people. And then, in the early days of that, there was also nutritional coaching involved as well.
There's actually been an evolution then. You didn't form fully as a spiritual, nutritional wellness coach the moment you exited the womb. Is that not how that happened?
Much like the 100-foot tall oak tree didn't crack out of the acorn in 5 seconds. Yeah, it's definitely an evolution for me. And I like to say life presented like a gluten-free breadcrumb trail to get me interested in what I'm supposed to be interested in. In my late teens, I got interested in like exercise, which then got me really interested in the power of nutrition, which then got me really interested in the power of stress reduction, which then got me really interested in emotional healing work. And then that's got me, which I'm still incredibly interested, but now that's also got me interested in how I can use comedy as a way of delivering perspectives of consciousness and consideration.
Now, I was describing you to one of the podcast studio owners who actually hadn't heard of you before, and I sort of described you as...
Oh, I'm offended. I'm offended.
Yeah, just stop right here.
Discussion's over.
I know, I'm sorry.
Do you not know who I am?
I described you as a spiritual version of Stephen Wright with the sort of deadpan, consummate deadpan. I was Googling you, I think, yesterday, and the term pitch perfect deadpan or something was used to describe you. How much of this sort of straightforward, you have to a little bit be aware of the joke space before you really get it. How much of that can trip you up in that? Do people think you are actually legitimate, talking about some of these fairly silly framings?
Yeah, it's hilarious to me that once in a while, yes, people think I am like seriously giving horrible advice. It's like, wow, he is really being serious. Like, this is how I can get more gluten intolerant. So I think in the beginning, about 2.5 years ago, when I started putting out comedy videos, there was more of the people thinking like I'm giving serious advice, because of course I do deliver it with a deadpan look and it's satire. And I understand in the beginning there was more of it because people just weren't used to this kind of thing. One, they weren't used to it coming from me because they didn't know who the hell I was. And two, I don't think there was very much of it happening in the health, wellness, and spiritual space. So it's kind of like unexpected territory to see satire. Therefore, we assume it's not satire. It's just like the world's worst health coach giving advice. And then, it's also fun. To me, it's amusing when it still happens. Whether it's like an obscure comment I see on the video where someone in the comment section is trying to save everybody else in the comment section, saying, you guys really need to be aware this isn't good advice. Or there was maybe a few weeks ago, Ben Greenfield put a podcast out. He and I were on it, and it was the whole time I was in character. And it was fun to do that for an hour. And we're talking about how to give yourself more diarrhea through increased fat intake, and that's how you're in a ketogenic state. And he would text me and like, JP, this is hilarious. Read the comment section. People think we're being serious. So to me, there's some amusement. And also, I would dare say there's comedic value to mystery. There's comedic value to not straightforward revealing where I stand about a given topic, because if I do, then it's not satire. It's a different breed of comedy. And satire is like, that's just my authentic fingerprint of comedy. So I love the mystery behind it, and I love the assumptions and emotional reactions, be they a reaction of laughter or a reaction of taking offense, that come out to videos. I enjoy that. I think it's valuable, and I think it's actually therapeutic for people to get in touch with whatever their emotions are.
You as a foil against their actual experience a little bit.
Yeah.
What kind of, a lot of your perspective is, again, taking yourself seriously. And if we look at sort of spiritual teachers and coaches and health and wellness people, there's embedded in that world this idea that as we get more advanced, we actually have reduced ego attachment, and we're able to be a little bit, more, have more equanimity, be less flapped, take things less personally. What do other spiritual coaches, teachers, gurus, how do they view? Of course, the average person is like either not getting the joke and, knee-jerking that you're giving bad advice, or they're playing along because they've heard from teachers who take themselves way too seriously, and that resonates. But what other, gurus and teachers, how do they seem to react to you? Have you come across some of that?
Yeah, I'm very flattered with, very humbled as well with people who have reached out to me and value what I'm doing. Eckhart Tolle, he'll oftentimes show my videos at his retreats. Tony Robbins reached out, and he invited me in to be his guest at one of his programs, and he gave me a wonderful book endorsement because he considers himself a fan. And to me, that is just so humbling that one, that they'd see something I'm doing. People who I admire what I'm doing. That is the definition of humbleness for me. But also, it's very inspiring seeing these people who are very powerful, very iconic, and they can laugh at themselves.
Or Dave Asprey, you're sort of the sorbet to the serious message, the palate cleanser.
Absolutely. And I think, to me, the evidence that we're looking at a false teacher, if you will, is someone who takes themselves too seriously. Tony Robbins, for instance, he asked, would I be willing or interested in making a video of the Tony Robbins experience at this event. And it's like, yeah, I would. And it's like so inspiring that you can laugh at yourself so much that you'd invite me to make this video parodying your event. And to me, whether it's a spiritual teacher or any other kind of teacher or an individual, it's a mark of security within oneself when we can laugh at ourselves. Mm-hmm. Whether it's JP's portraying it, I see what he's portraying. I see that that's a reflection of some things that I am, and I can laugh at myself. And then there's certainly some teachers who don't like what I do. Mm-hmm. And my purpose isn't to discount them just because, like, well, they don't like what I do, so here's why they're uninvolved. No, it's like, one, my stuff just might not work for them. But also I think when a teacher is maybe not coming from the most genuine, authentic place, and they need to pretend that there's something greater than a delusional human being just like everybody else, then when I shine the light on how we're all delusional, and I shine the light on how there's so much of our egotistical nature embedded in spirituality and health, then they might not like what they see. And you mentioned something earlier about like our egos getting less and less attached. I think one of the most egotistical things that happens is we try to be ego-free. Uh-huh. I think there would be nothing more gratifying to the human ego than to come across as being so evolved that we have no ego. I think that is just pure ego. So I think when I portray something like that, then people who are operating out of that model of getting a sense of self-worth through being so egotistical that they need to be egoless, but they're blind to how they're losing themselves, they won't like what they see because they're playing a trick on themselves.
It's a little too close to home. It's too resonant with how they actually are day to day.
For sure. And probably a trick I'm playing on myself is I point this stuff out so that I can pretend that I'm above it all, which is just the most delusional thing.
Right. And as you say, you're yoga, so you are sort of lambasting your own, lifestyle.
Absolutely. And Dr. Hill, how long have you been gluten-free?
I am gluten-free about 80% of the time.
Okay. And how long have you been 80% gluten-free?
About 10 years.
Okay. Well, I've been gluten-free 15 years, so I think we know where we stand.
Right. Nice. Yeah, I have this perspective that, people paleo, low carb, gluten-free, high fat, these things are all really important. But it's also important not to be orthorexic. It's so rigid with your diet, with your perspectives, with monitoring your life that you lose track of why you're doing it and have the flexibility to live an actual life with other people.
It's weird how we can become so obsessed. What I'll say this way: we can become so obsessive and use health practices to justify it. And it might all at some unconscious level be designed to keep us disconnected from people because we're afraid of connection, because we're afraid of being hurt or rejected. Mm-hmm. If we can stay disconnected from people, then we'll never be hurt again. Maybe is the plight of the wounded inner child that runs most of our lives. And then at a different level, I think when we start to think a little bit more than just one-dimensionally and believing everything we think, we can realize, wow, our health practices might make us very unhealthy. And I think it's our attitude about our health practices, a degree of obsessiveness, compulsiveness that we apply to our health practices that could potentially make us unhealthy. So if you mentioned you're 80% gluten-free, like, wow, that's amazing. Like, it sounds like you have balance. And I'm sure you're not celiac, or else you probably need to be 100% gluten-free. But the fact that you can be 80% gluten-free, to me, suggests like, okay, you've got elasticity here. You aren't just dogmatic, where you're willing to injure your health in the name of improving your health. Where it's like our psychological stress about, I've got to be, only eat non-GMO, organic, gluten-free, nightshade-free foods that are locally farmed, picked by a left-handed farmer who was a Buddhist. Right. I can only eat those, and if I don't, I will be stressed. So it's like, okay, those foods will increase my vitality by 5 units, and my obsession about that will decrease my vitality by 11 units. Yeah. So I think holistically, we have to consider how our attitude about our health practices can positively or negatively impact our
I mean, did
health.
you find yourself in this place years ago before you were this evolved in your own sort of
Yeah.
giving out advice? Would you find yourself adhering to yoga too much and going, no, everyone must do yoga, or everyone must avoid all sugar? Or did you have these, let's say, grasping perspectives?
No, not me. I've always been perfect. I'm just here to help the little people, point out how they're flawed. No, of course, I'm incredibly obsessive about health practices. And in fact, you mentioned the word orthorexia. I think the first time I heard that word would have been back in maybe 2005 or 2006. And I remember specifically, for some reason, I was in Seattle teaching a weekend workshop, and I started talking about orthorexia. And I was essentially talking about how it is just the biggest sham. And, our society is so unhealthy that we've invented this word in order to, categorize people who care about their health.
Mm-hmm.
So I was so orthorexic that I couldn't see orthorexia. I was in it. I couldn't observe it.
Yeah.
But now looking at it, it's like, oh, yeah, orthorexia, that's the other extreme.
Mm-hmm.
One extreme is people who aren't mindful at all about their health. And orthorexia is the other extreme, where people are obsessive compulsive about their health, which is either extreme is probably terribly unhealthy. So yeah, I've lived by trial by fire for long years, and I would dare say I was obsessive compulsive about my health.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from spiritual practices, eating practices, exercise, for at least 10 solid years,
Mm-hmm.
from probably 20 to age 30.
Are there things that didn't work in that rush towards grasping all the rules and doing everything right? Did you find yourself actually impairing your health, impairing your wellness, your capacity, your flexibility?
It's weird. Were there things that didn't work? Heck yeah. Did I see they weren't working? Nope.
Okay.
I think the psychological condition of dogma makes us very blind. It makes, at least for me, it made me very blind. So I couldn't see what was working or what wasn't working, because I was just dogmatically fixated on this is the right way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
This will work. So I don't have to pay attention to whether it works or not, because my dogma says this is the way. So yeah, I never fell off of any catastrophic cliffs with my health. But looking back, I think some of what wasn't working for me the most, consequentially showed up as being very psychologically rigid,
Mm-hmm.
controlling, rejecting other people because they weren't conscious enough.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so accepting that I'll only accept people who are completely accepting. Jeez.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, is there a line for you when you're being a satirist, when you're giving this deadpan delivery about things that are somewhat triggering or inflammatory for people? I mean, I've seen you, hold big swaths of raw meat up to vegans, and I mean, I know vegans who that would be like, crucifying a baby. The sort of
Sure.
10th level vegans don't eat anything that casts a shadow kind of, perspective.
Sure.
I imagine there must be for you some line, or maybe there's not. I mean, where is that for you? Do you feel like it's all is humor fair game? Pushing these buttons.
Yeah, to me, it's not all fair game, because I'm not dogmatic enough with humor to believe it helps people no matter what.
Okay.
I believe, honestly, humor is a powerful energy. Therefore, it has the power to help, and therefore it has the power to hurt. It can be very constructive or very destructive, and I think part of it is, what's my intention?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's like, what really is my intention beyond the desire to get laughs? So I have to really consider that. And then I also need to consider not just what's my intention and how's this come across to me, but how's this come across to other people? And that's not at all to fall into a people-pleasing mentality of what will please other people and what will avoid discomfort. Now, to me, that's dysfunctional. But I want to avoid what would actually hurt people. And I realize, like, where the line is, we all define that. Mm-hmm. So in order to avoid people being hurt completely, I would have to say nothing ever. But, like for instance, my girlfriend is a vegan, and there's times like I'll bounce things off her. She also does work with plant medicine and ayahuasca. And recently her and I together did a video called If Trump Drank Ayahuasca. So during that time, because she's much more intimate in the ayahuasca realm than I was, like I want to be respectful. Like I want to, I'm not afraid to like shine the light on hypocrisies, but I also want to be respectful. So there was a lot of questions I was bouncing off of her and having her input. And there's been other times where there's been video ideas that I think, wow, this will make a great video. It'll get a lot of laughs, and I'm not going to do the video because it actually would cross the line. And there was a video idea I had on gluten-free pride, where it essentially is a big analogy to gay pride. And it's like, yeah, I was born gluten intolerant. I was born this way. It's not a choice. And I would talk to gay friends of mine and bounce the idea off of them. And about half said that's an amazing idea, and the other half said, yeah, we think you're crossing the line. And if half the people think I'm crossing the line, I'm definitely crossing.
So sort of weakening the legitimacy of the LBGT message and concern by mirroring it with a less serious,
for sure. And in 10 years, when the LGBT movement in culture is in a more secure place, it's had more years to create cohesion, then it might be appropriate. But right now, it's like, no, this is, it's in too new of a state. It's too fragile, and that's fine. But if 10% of people would say that's crossing the line, it's like, I'll do it.
Right.
I think about 10% or less is pretty normal. And to me, that's a pretty acceptable consequence.
Folks that just have diametrically different views and are far out in that bell curve from you. Yeah.
For sure. I'm well aware that human beings are just fascinatingly creative. So we can create a perspective about anything in order to get offended. If we get our emotional needs met by feeling emotions of passion that we create when we get offended about something because we don't know how to be passionate in a more direct way about things that are meaningful to us, then we'll figure out how to get offended about anything. So I don't want to avoid that, because I realize some people are connoisseurs of offense. They don't know how else to feel emotions of passion. So anything I say, they'll get offended. If I don't say anything, they'll get offended that I'm not saying anything. So that's not the crowd that I want to define where is the line for me.
Sure. Interesting. So as I was heading over here I work in a biofeedback center, and one of my EEG technicians asked me, ask JP, how does he feel about being dubbed the honey badger of the spiritual world? And does he feel like he's actually meeting that responsibility? That was the question from one of my technicians, John.
I like that. And I think I'm just looking at the back of my book. Yes, I have a made-up book endorsement on the back of my book from Krishna, of all people. Just Krishna, okay. Who says JP is the honey badger of the spiritual kingdom. So I better be okay with that because I wrote it.
Okay.
But to me, that's a fun statement. And if I was pretending there's a deeper meaning behind that, which I think there is, it would be metaphorically, a honey badger is something that isn't intimidated. It's something that's very ferocious. It'll chew through what's there. So to me, there's a preciousness about the spiritual world that can intimidate the hell out of people from questioning it. So the idea that the soft talking and we're all precious and things are the way we think we are, the fact that I'm not intimidated by that. In fact, I'm so unintimidated by it that I'm willing to see how the spiritual world is also the opposite of what it says it is. That's something I would say I take pride in, and and it feels good to me. while also respecting it. Yeah, I don't think honey badgers are known to be respectful animals,
No.
but you can't intimidate a honey badger, that's for sure.
You need a different endorsement for the respect side, maybe.
We'll pull in some other animals for
Right.
those analogies, like a dolphin.
Or
The cross between a honey badger and a dolphin.
Okay, I'm not sure what that means beyond a really wrinkly brain.
Well, Dr. Hill, have you ever seen a honey badger hold its breath for 7 minutes?
I have not.
That's what it means.
That's wonderful. All right, so let's be serious for a second. I'm curious, in this journey you've taken, and all of us who have spiritual practices, health practices, who are not simply punching time clocks and eating McDonald's. There's a process. We all have to find our own path and find what works for us, and not. I mean, I'm a big fan of if somebody tells you something is true, don't believe it unless you find it's true for yourself, from a spiritual point of view at least. I mean, when I'm teaching neuroscience, I'm usually pretty accurate in the facts, not always. Sure. But when I'm teaching somebody about how their mind works, it's a lot more of a gray area, no pun intended. I'm wondering for you at this point in your 15 years of journey along this path, what are the most impactful things that you do? The biggest, keeping your sanity, keeping your health, keeping your flexibility. What is your daily routine or your weekly or your monthly, yearly strategy to keep engaging in these healthy behaviors and keep yourself sane?
Yeah, I love the question. I feel like I'm probably going to say something that I need to learn. So listen up, JP. Starting kind of the macro, and I'll get a little micro in a second. There's a couple mantras that are so important to me, so helpful to me to keep close to my heart. One, I don't know if they're mantras, affirmations, or quotes, probably all the same thing, but one is nothing is as it seems. So that helps me lean more into a curious mindset rather than a certain mindset. I think curiosity is oriented to growth and progression. Certainty is oriented to constriction, control, and a sense of safety. Another mindset of mine that's so important to me is to realize the path I take to find myself will eventually become the path I lose myself on.
Oh, interesting.
And so it's kind of like what works for me for a while will work against me after a while if I stay attached to it, whether it's a year, 10 years, whether it's a philosophy or a nutrition practice. And then the last of these macro affirmations, in fact, this one I have on my desk, I've had it written on this note card for probably well over 4 years, but it's just a question. It says, what wants to live through me? Not what do I want, but what wants to live through me. And that, what that does for me, that question, what wants to live through me, is it keeps me a little bit more humbled to kind of like listening to my intuition, listening to the guidance of my heart, and not so much what do I want in order to gratify myself, but how can I be of service to whatever this life is that lives through me. And at times doing so, that ticks my ego off. And there's just simply more grace, ease, quality of life, contentment, and success I get the more I follow the scent trail of what wants to live through me, rather than what do I want, I being my delusional egoic sense of who I am. With that said, getting a little more micro, I think daily practices that really are important to me, a morning routine where I start off with gratitude. It's either in a gratitude journal or my girlfriend and I just share with each other what we're grateful for, which I think doing this with a person is next level, even though journaling it is so powerful. And then it's important for me to stimulate my body. So I'll take a cold shower and then usually go out and take a 30-minute walk. And in those self-care rituals, I think they help me, and then I meditate for 10 minutes. They help me center my mind, wake my body up, connect my mind and my body, connect me to my feelings, not just being stuck in my head, but the gratitude, that's a very feeling-oriented deal. And my experience is that sets me up well for the day, where I'm coming from a wonderful place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we come from a well-aligned place, our aim is always going to be better. So it's like how my experience is how I am at 4 p.m. in the afternoon can be a symptom of how I aimed myself in the formative part of my day. So those morning routines are so important. And then for me, regular exercise, very clean eating, not obsessive compulsive, but I'm, kind of an 80, 90%er like yourself, where eating good, clean, organic, whole foods, doing my best to pay attention to like what's my body calling for rather than just what my mind dogmatically believes I should eat. So doing my best to pay attention to those things. And then lastly, and I'm going to shut up here because I realize I could ramble on for a while, it's so important to me to stay challenged. I think if we're not being challenged, we don't grow, we don't get stronger. Much like if we don't challenge a muscle, it doesn't get stronger. We know that physiologically. So it's the challenge that's uncomfortable, yet it's exactly the challenge that makes us grow. So for me, it's important to do things that scare me and intimidate me because that's what's challenging, whether it's taking on a new professional endeavor, doing videos in a new way, doing live comedy, letting go of my client practice. Wow, that scares me.
Yeah.
So staying challenged physically and psychologically, I think, are incredibly important.
You also remind me of something one of my meditation teachers says. I think this may have come from Shinzen Young, who says, your mind has led you astray whenever you reach a conclusion.
I wish that wasn't true, but I definitely believe that.
It sounds like you have some great perspective around staying flexible, about not attaching to the capital I, the anatma, Sanskrit, the lack of self. How much do you think you're triggering people's ability to get these spiritual messages when you're doing stand-up, when you're doing, sort of satirical comedy? You're certainly framing people's beliefs and helping poke at that a little bit and shake them up and, help develop the perspective. But do you think you're actually communicating some of the more, let's say, traditional spiritual messages about flexibility, kindness, lack of harm? Is that coming through the comedy for your viewers and listeners?
Maybe. I would dare say a lot of that's going to be in the eye of the beholder. In this redheaded beholder, I would dare say the most consistent thing I portray in my comedy, which, if we pretend like teaching by example is the most powerful teacher. It's not what I say, but it's the example I embody while I say whatever I say. I would dare say non-attachment is a big part of that. I love to take a look at what's most important to me, as I do with my videos, and then I play with it. And to me, that's an act of non-attachment. So if I can model that for people, if they can see it, if they can be inspired to adopt a level of non-attachment for themselves, even if it's 1% more, then to me that's a great win. And the material, if you will, the subject matter that I do comedy on, it's important stuff. I'm not talking about sex, drugs, and these shallow things that you can get a quick, easy, predictable laugh with. In my opinion, I'm talking about important things. And I think that which is most important to us is what's most important to be non-attached to. I think somewhere along the way, most of us adopted some kind of erroneous, misguided belief that said, be non-attached, accept important things, attach like hell to those. Now, I think if the Buddha was around, I mean, I know we can just say whatever we want to say and pretend the Buddha would say
Sid,
that.
right? It's important to call him Sid when you're being colloquial.
Sid. Sid and I.
Yeah, exactly.
I would imagine the Buddha would say something about be non-attached to everything, not just the things that are easy to be non-attached to, which are the things that are not important to us, but even the things that are very important to us, be non-attached to those. It doesn't mean they're less important to us. It means we're less attached to them. And I think the energy of playfulness is synonymous with the energy of non-attachment. I think seriousness is synonymous with attachment, control, and constriction. So if I can embody that and be an example of it, then I would dare say that's really all I could ask for.
It sounds like it's very similar to the sort of judgment versus curiosity piece you mentioned earlier. When I teach meditation, I always teach, if you find yourself evaluating the process, I can't meditate, my mind's getting distracted. Try to replace your judgment with curiosity as a core piece. I had never thought of it as curiosity as a growth lever, but it sounds great to me, and I will now steal that and and use that when I'm teaching. So that's wonderful. I really appreciate the perspective. So curious, you're working on all kinds of things. You're a very busy guy. You produce content. You have a very active life. What sort of things are you doing now? I mean, you have a couple books I think you've produced, or at least one that I know about. Can you summarize some of the if people want to dig into the JP-ness of this world, how do they do that?
Yeah. Well, and I want to highlight, Dr. Hill, you just said penis with JP-ness.
I did.
Which is well played. I like how you slept that in there. But yeah, I'm
just being a dick.
A couple months ago, I had my first book came out, How to Be Ultra Spiritual, 12 and a half Steps to Spiritual Superiority. And I put my heart and soul into that. It was just absolutely wonderful. That sounds narcissistic. The process was wonderful. Is the book wonderful? You're going to have to be a bit curious, non-judger of that. And then, I'm making videos, and something that has me really excited about my videos present day is I'm changing how I'm doing them. Once upon a time, when I started the comedy videos, I was doing all my videos in character, headband on, flower on. That character, once upon a time, was freedom to me. Like, wow, this is a new expression. And I began to find earlier this year, which was like 2 years after doing the character, being the character it's now not freedom. It's constriction. It's kind of like, wow, that character helped me find myself, and now I'm losing myself when I pin myself to just being the character. So now the character, essentially, he's a tool in the tool belt. I pull him out when the time's right, rather than obligating myself to be the character all the time on video. So, I've realized the character is a part of me, but who I am is bigger than just the character. So on video, it's been very exciting for me to explore more of me, sharing more perspectives, having comedy that comes from an angle other than just the character, as well as doing comedy on what I would say are issues that are incredibly meaningful, but they don't fall just into the spiritual genre. To me, that's so important. It's just, I need to honor my heart and soul's direction rather than just staying in the zone of the familiar. So that's been big for me lately. And then I've been doing a lot of live shows with stand-up comedy, stand-up authenticity, in conjunction with supporting my book. And I'll have more of a full-on comedy tour happening later this year.
Oh, great.
So yeah, that's a little bit of what's happening for me as I, stumble around in life pretending I know what I'm doing.
Some of this reminds me of an interview I saw with Stephen Colbert many years ago when he was still only in character all the time. And he hadn't yet he wasn't Stephen Colbert, he was just Colbert, Yeah. And one thing he mentioned was playing with who's going to show up to the interview when he was not doing his show? Was Colbert going to show up and do the other interview, or was it Stephen Colbert? Which character? I imagine, especially over the past few years, as you're getting more known, it's like, well, do we have J.P. Sears, the ultra spiritual dude, or do we have J.P. Sears, the guy that's propping up the ultra spiritual dude for a purpose? I imagine that the interviewers and people you're interacting with are never quite sure what they're getting. Are you? Do you know if you're in character, or is it easy to tell?
Well, the operating under the label of "let me just be me," I love that. And that given that the character is a part of me, there's times where I'll if it's an interview or a discussion, there's times where I will oscillate into the character, and then I'll oscillate out of them and be a different expression. And there's times where, an interviewer would say, like, I'd like to interview the character. And when it's agreed upon, like, cool, like, I'll do that. Yeah. If it feels good to me in the upfront agreement, great. But honestly, like last week, there were a few times where I showed up for an interview, and just last second they said, "Oh, would you mind putting the headband on?" And I honestly, it's taken me a long time to be able to honor myself enough to say that doesn't feel right to me. I'd like to just be me, rather than essentially being what you want me to be right now. But, if they want a certain something, if we want just JP to be the character, tell me that in the beginning, and I'll either agree to it or not. But, in the spur of the last moment, then it's usually going to be a no, unless it just feels right. But yeah, it has been, not to sound cliche, but it's been a very, I'd say, powerful hero's journey. What the comedy has taken me on inward, honestly, where, I've encountered parts of myself, a lot of trials by fire, and I'm arriving at a much deeper sense of self than I had before the comedy, and being able to essentially honor what my heart says in any given moment, where it's kind of like, yeah, if you want me to be the character and that doesn't feel right to me, then instead of betraying myself in the name of pleasing you, I'll just honor you. I'll honor me. And if that works for you, cool. If it doesn't, that's cool too. But I'll at least have my integrity with myself.
So I'm hearing a lot of good perspective on this journey you've come through. Let me ask you a hard question, though. Where do you fall over? Where are you finding yourself at your growth edge? Where, are you trying new things and it not working for you? Where is that point of pain?
Yeah. What isn't working for me is overworking. I've for honestly the past about 15 years, well, basically all of my career, I've been one to stay manically active with work so that I can have this fleeting sense of productivity that gives me this sense that, I'm appeasing my father, even though he's not watching me. It's just, my impression of my father, trying to always meet his expectations. So that's not working for me. In January, I started some major shifts on that. Very uncomfortable, but trying to find my balance between the extremes of inaction on one side and manic action on the other, and having heart alignment action be the place of balance in between. That's where I'm stumbling around. I'm grateful that I'm stumbling, because it means I'm not stuck in the concrete of manic action like I was. The idea of being lazy and complacent with inaction, that's, I don't think, something I need to worry too much about. So it's at times incredibly uncomfortable when I'm looking at an hour of time that I'm not being quote unquote productive. It's like, wow, this is uncomfortable, because now I have to connect to me. Now I have to connect to emotions that I otherwise would have buried with the dirt of manic action, where I'm doing things, not the priorities, not things that need to be done, but I'm doing things that I justify need to be done. So that's an important place I'm at. Not mastered there at all, but I'm the blind man stumbling along, trying to find his way in the space of heart alignment action.
Well, some nice humility there. Thank you for sharing that vulnerability with us. It sounds like you've moved beyond your personal one-on-one coaching practice, and I hear that's a difficult transition. But thank you for you're coaching all of us via YouTube and Twitter and everywhere else. I'm curious, when you're working with people, be it on stage and you're trying to drop a little wisdom, or in your one-on-one coaching practice, Are there truisms or things that you try to get out to everyone? Are there messages that you really want to make sure that they hear the JP way of, the perspective about how this should work in terms of sort of personal development or loving yourself? Are there things that you got to get in because it's important for your message?
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer that we really only teach what we need to learn the most. So apparently I still haven't heard the message enough because I still always teach it. But one of the reoccurring messages is you're not who you think you are. I love to ask people to take a look at who do you think you are? Mm-hmm. Who do you want to be? And who are you really? Asking, getting the message of that question out. I'm not one to define for anybody who they are, but I'm one to challenge people into leaving the comfort zone of who they think they are, even leaving the comfort zone of who they want to be, in the name of embracing something greater, which is who they really are. That's been a reoccurring theme that's been very important to me to invite people to entertain, and I'm guessing that's because I still need to entertain who am I really, and I probably always will. And it's very easy for me to think I'm who other people think I am. It's very easy for me to think I am who I think I am, and it's very easy for me to think that I should be who I want to be. And I think who I want to be is, for the most part, engineered out of my insecure, insignificant feeling ego parts that create this delusional grandeur of fantasy and justify it as like triumph and we can do anything we want. But really, I think it's a way I try to escape pain. But I think surrendering into the place of not trying to create ourselves, but realize who ourselves actually are, who we really are. To me, that's a great place of surrender that deserves to be drank from, if you will.
So is that sort of a lowercase I ego moving through you? The genuine self, if you will, the less reactive, attached self, maybe?
Yeah, I think I could get on board with that.
Nice. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. Where can folks find out more about you? Where can we track you down? Where can we find your comedy tour? How can we drink of the JP?
Yeah, well, right now I'm in my home office, so my address, if you want to peek inside my windows, is online. All my social media handles are Awaken with JP. Very active on Facebook, YouTube, and my website, awakenwithjp.com, that's got upcoming events that I'll be doing. Seemingly there's more being added to that all the time. So all things Awaken with JP. Okay. Great place to find me. I love to connect with people. And of course, if you find me incredibly offensive, then Awaken with JP is the best place for you to avoid.
Right. Well, we'll put some of those in the show notes. And this show will come out in probably mid-July. And so we'll share that with you when that happens. But JP, again, thanks so much. It's been great to get some virtual FaceTime with you. And I look forward maybe to seeing you at some point face-to-face if we're at a conference together. Or if you're in Los Angeles, please come by Peak Brain, get a brain map. Happy to comp you some peek under the covers in a non-spiritual way if you want to see what's going on in your brain.
And I would love that, Dr. Hill. I'd love to take you up on that offer, and I'm terrified of what we might find.
All right, JP, again, thanks so much. And folks, if you want to do something with your brains, take control and take care of those brains. If you need to soften your grip on how spiritual you are, check out some of JP's content because it's hard to take yourself seriously when you're listening to JP. So again, thanks so much. And folks, take care of those brains.